Ulysses S. Grant walked into the lobby of the Willard Hotel in 1869, wanting nothing more than a quiet cigar and a glass of whiskey. Within minutes, he was surrounded. Men in silk waistcoats pressed close, speaking in urgent whispers about railroad contracts, tariff votes, and cabinet appointments. They bought him drinks. They told elaborate stories. They made promises wrapped in leather portfolios stuffed with cash. Grant dubbed them lobbyists, a term of contempt that would outlive his presidency by a century and a half. But the Willard was more than the birthplace of a word. It was the architecture of American corruption itself, a building designed to transform democracy into commodity. Chapter 1, 2 Blocks from Power. And Henry Willard understood a truth that would reshape American politics. Proximity is worth more than principle. When he leased 6 connected townhouses at the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and 14th Street in 1850, Willard was not thinking about democracy. He was thinking about real estate. The location sat precisely 2 blocks from the White House. Walk north on 14th Street for 3 minutes and you reach the Executive Mansion. Turn east on Pennsylvania Avenue and the Capitol Dome rose in the distance. Between these 2 poles of American power, Henry Willard planted his flag. The property had operated as a hotel since 1816, passing through various owners who recognized its commercial potential but failed to exploit it. Willard saw deeper. He understood that politicians need somewhere to sleep, and sleeping brings vulnerability. A senator renting a room becomes a customer. A customer has needs. Needs create leverage. Within months of taking over, Willard began expanding. He purchased adjacent properties, broke through walls, and created a sprawling establishment that could accommodate 300 guests. But size alone meant nothing. What mattered was position. The Willard sat at the gravitational center of federal power, and gravity pulls everything toward it. Pennsylvania Avenue functioned as the ceremonial spine of Washington. Presidential inaugurations processed down this street. Victory parades marched this route. Foreign dignitaries rode these cobblestones. Every person of consequence in America eventually walked past the Willard's entrance. Willard simply had to make them stop, and he invested in luxury that Washington had never seen. Crystal chandeliers hung in the main dining room. Turkish carpets covered the lobby floors. The furniture came from Philadelphia craftsmen who supplied the White House itself. Willard was not decorating a hotel. He was building a competitor to official government buildings, a place where power would feel more comfortable than in its designated chambers. The strategy worked with brutal efficiency. By 1853, senators were abandoning their boarding house lodgings for Willard suites. Cabinet secretaries began taking permanent rooms. Foreign ministers set up unofficial embassies in corner apartments. The hotel achieved something remarkable. It made proximity feel like belonging. Location created opportunity, but Willard created inevitability. He did not wait for government officials to seek him out. He went to them. He offered discounted rates to influential congressmen. He extended unlimited credit to men who controlled appropriations committees. He made the Willard indispensable before anyone realized they needed it. The building's position created a second, subtler advantage. Anyone approaching the White House from downtown Washington passed the Willard first. Politicians heading to meetings walked by those glass windows. Lobbyists, favor seekers, and influence peddlers learned to station themselves in the lobby, waiting to intercept targets before official business began. The hotel became a buffer zone, a space where informal conversations happened, before formal decisions were made. Willard never called himself a political operator. He claimed only to run a respectable establishment. But respectability provided cover for the mechanisms forming beneath the surface. The hotel was becoming more than lodging. It was becoming the architecture of access itself, a physical structure that converted geographical proximity into political advantage. Henry Willard had built a machine. He just didn't advertise what it produced. Chapter 2: The Architecture of Access. The lobby was designed to encourage lingering, and lingering, as it turned out, was where democracy went to die. Walk through the Willard's main entrance in 1855, and the space announced itself immediately. The lobby stretched 120 feet, a vast rectangle filled with leather sofas, velvet chairs, and small marble tables positioned at intimate intervals. Gaslight sconces lined the walls. Spittoons appeared every 10 feet. This was not a room for passing through. It was a room for staying. The architectural genius lay in the layout. The front desk sat tucked in an alcove to the left, barely visible from the entrance. Registration did not dominate the space. Instead, the eye traveled naturally to the seating areas, the clusters of furniture that invited conversation. A man entering the Willard did not feel he was checking into a hotel. He felt he was joining a club. Alcoves carved into the walls created semi-private spaces within the public lobby. High-backed chairs could be positioned to shield conversations from casual observation. A senator and a railroad executive could sit facing each other across a small table, visible to the room but inaudible beyond 6 feet. The architecture manufactured discretion without requiring actual privacy. The main staircase rose at the far end of the lobby, forcing every guest to traverse the entire length of the public space to reach their rooms. This was not accidental. It was strategic choreography. Every trip to your suite became a procession through potential interactions. You could not avoid the lobby. You could not slip upstairs unnoticed. The building made you available. Adjacent to the lobby, the main dining room operated on similar principles. Long tables seated 12 to 16 guests. Private booths lined the perimeter for smaller gatherings. But the key feature was the open connection between dining room and lobby. Folding doors could be thrown open, merging the spaces. A man eating breakfast could see everyone entering the hotel. A man waiting in the lobby could watch who dined with whom. The second floor contained parlors for private meetings. These rooms could be rented by the hour, no questions asked about their purpose. Furniture arranged in conversation circles. Heavy drapes blocked window light. Thick carpets muffled footsteps in the hallway outside. These parlors provided plausible deniability, spaces where business could be conducted without official record. Even the bar served architectural purpose. Located off the main lobby but visible through arched doorways, it offered another gradation of privacy. Men who did not want to be seen sitting together in the lobby could claim separate errands to the bar, meet for 10 minutes over whiskey, and return to different parts of the hotel. The building provided multiple channels for the same transaction. The Willard's design eliminated the natural barriers between public and private space. Everything flowed together. The lobby bled into the dining room. The dining room connected to the bar. Hallways converged at the main staircase. The architecture created constant, casual collision between people who might otherwise never interact. This spatial design had economic consequences. A railroad executive staying at the Willard did not need to make appointments with senators. He simply sat in the lobby at 8 in the morning, when legislators walked through on their way to Capitol Hill. A defense contractor seeking meetings with War Department officials could position himself near the front desk, where clerks announced visitors. Geography replaced protocol. The building also created psychological pressure. Senators eating in the main dining room knew they were being watched by the men at the surrounding tables. They knew offers would follow the meal. The architecture made refusal awkward. To leave the dining room, you had to walk past the lobbyists waiting in the lobby. The building itself funneled you toward transaction. Henry Willard had built something unprecedented, a structure that transformed democratic process into market transaction through pure spatial arrangement. The hotel did not hide corruption in back rooms. It normalized corruption in public spaces designed to make the abnormal feel routine. The architecture was not merely accommodating influence. It was manufacturing it, one carefully positioned sofa at a time. Chapter 3. When Presidents Came to Stay. By 1860, 5 presidents had walked through those doors, and the pattern was set. Power did not visit the Willard. It resided there. The building's transformation from luxury hotel to political necessity accelerated with presidential patronage. Millard Fillmore stayed there before his inauguration in 1850. Franklin Pierce used the Willard as his unofficial headquarters during the transition. James Buchanan held court in the lobby, receiving visitors who could not secure White House meetings. The hotel was becoming the anteroom to American power, the waiting area where ambitions queued before official audiences. But Abraham Lincoln's arrival in February 1861 revealed the Willard's true function. Lincoln entered Washington under death threats, warned of assassination plots along his rail route. Then he went directly to the Willard, not to the White House, not to Capitol Hill, to room number 6, a corner suite on the 2nd floor. For 10 days before his inauguration, Lincoln lived at the Willard. He wrote his inaugural address at the hotel's desk. He met with cabinet selections in the 2nd floor parlors. He received delegations of senators in the lobby. Office seekers lined the hallways outside his room, hundreds of men hoping for appointments, positions, influence. The Willard became the de facto executive mansion, and the actual White House sat empty 2 blocks away. The symbolism was unmistakable. Federal government operated from a privately owned hotel. Policy was made in rented rooms. The line between public service and commercial transaction dissolved completely. Lincoln later joked that the Willard should send its bills directly to the Treasury Department, since his staff consumed more resources there than at any government building. Cabinet members followed Lincoln's example. William Seward kept rooms at the Willard throughout his tenure as Secretary of State. Salmon Chase, Treasury Secretary, maintained a permanent suite. Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War, used Willard parlors for confidential meetings with military contractors. The hotel was not hosting government. It was replacing government buildings as the preferred location for actual governance. This presidential seal of approval had cascading effects. If cabinet secretaries lived at the Willard, their subordinates rented rooms nearby. If the president planned his administration from the hotel, favor seekers knew where to position themselves. The building achieved critical mass. Everyone important stayed there because everyone important stayed there. The logic became circular and absolute. The Willard staff expanded to support this transformation. By 1862, the hotel employed 200 workers, doormen, porters, desk clerks, waiters, chambermaids, cooks, and a small army of messengers who ran errands between the hotel and government offices. These employees became repositories of political intelligence. Doormen knew which senators arrived together. Waiters knew who bought whom dinner. Chambermaids knew which rooms entertained late-night visitors. This information had market value. A lobbyist who tipped generously could learn which committee chairman was accepting visitors. A journalist who befriended the desk clerk could track which cabinet members met privately. The hotel staff became informal intelligence brokers, monetizing access to knowledge that proximity generated naturally. The Willard also developed its own social hierarchy. Certain tables in the dining room became known as power centers. The corner near the fireplace belonged to senators. The table by the window hosted military officers. Railroad men colonized the alcove near the bar. These territories were not assigned by management. They emerged organically and then calcified into custom. The building was creating its own governmental order, parallel to but separate from official Washington. By 1865, no serious political negotiation happened anywhere else. The Willard had achieved complete capture of informal power, and senators scheduled breakfast meetings there before congressional sessions. Lobbyists rented rooms by the month to maintain permanent presence. Even Supreme Court justices stopped by for evening cigars in the lobby. The hotel had become what Henry Willard envisioned 10 years earlier. Not a business that served government, but a structure that replaced it. The building's dominance was now self-sustaining. Power attracted power. Access created more access. The Willard was no longer simply proximate to American government. It was the shadow capital, the real location where democracy's daily business occurred. And that business, as Grant would soon discover, had very little to do with the public good. Chapter 4. Grant's Whiskey and the Birth of a Four. Grant's Whiskey and the Birth of a Word. The retired general just wanted peace, but the lobby offered only transaction. Eco in his disgust would name an industry. Ulysses S. Grant finished his second term as president, exhausted and bitter. 8 years of governance had drained whatever idealism he brought from Appomattox. By 1877, he wanted nothing from Washington except distance. But old habits die slowly, and the Willards' lobby still felt like comfortable territory. So, on certain evenings, Grant returned. He would arrive around 7, after the dinner crowd thinned. He preferred the corner near the fireplace, a high-backed leather chair that offered some illusion of privacy. He ordered his standard: whiskey, neat, and a cigar from the humidor the hotel kept specifically for him. For 15 or 20 minutes, Grant might actually relax. Then they descended. The first approach was always polite. A businessman Grant vaguely recognized from some reception would happen to be passing. Could he offer the former president a drink? Grant, raised to be courteous, would accept. The man would sit uninvited. Within minutes, the conversation would turn. There was this small matter of a railroad contract, or a tariff bill coming up for vote, or a customs position that needed filling. The man had a proposal. Just a thought, really. Perhaps the general, with his many connections, might mention it too. Before Grant could extricate himself, another would appear. Then another. They materialized like smoke, these men in expensive suits carrying leather document cases. They bought him drinks he did not want. They told elaborate stories about business ventures that needed only a word from someone influential. They made offers, partnerships in railroad companies, positions on corporate boards, consulting fees for unnamed services. The proposals were never crude. The bribes were never called bribes. One evening in 1879, Grant sat trapped between 2 railroad executives and a tariff lobbyist. The railroad men were arguing about transcontinental routes. The tariff lobbyist was explaining why steel imports needed restricting. None of them were talking to Grant, exactly. They were performing for each other, demonstrating their access to power by proximity to the man who once held it. Grant stood abruptly. He dropped coins on the table for his whiskey and walked to the front desk, where the night manager was sorting mail. The manager, who had worked the Willard for 20 years, asked if anything was wrong, yet Grant gestured toward the lobby where the men still sat at his abandoned table. "Those people," he said, "those damned lobbyists are getting worse every year. They think they can buy anyone." The word already existed in political vocabulary, but Grant's contemptuous usage gave it teeth. Lobbyists. Not petitioners or advocates or concerned citizens. Lobbyists. Men who lurked in lobbies, who ambushed officials in semi-public spaces, who confused proximity with right to audience. Grant's disgust was personal and specific, rooted in dozens of evenings ruined by men who mistook his presence for consent. The term spread quickly through Washington. Newspapers began using it within weeks. Lobbyist appeared in congressional debate by 1880. It carried Grant's contempt forward, branding the practice with moral disapproval even as the practice intensified. The Willard's role was explicit in the definition. To lobby meant to haunt hotel public spaces, to intercept officials between private and public life, to leverage architectural access into political influence. But naming the problem did nothing to solve it. Grant's contempt was widely shared and completely irrelevant. Legislators hated lobbyists and took their money anyway. Newspapers condemned lobbying while publishing advertisements from the firms that practiced it. Reform movements demanded regulation while negotiating exceptions for their own advocates. The Willard's lobby became more crowded, not less. Grant's coinage simply made the transaction more explicit. Men who previously claimed to be concerned citizens now openly identified as lobbyists. They printed business cards. They formed professional associations. They rented permanent office space in the hotel. Contempt became legitimacy through repetition. Grant himself understood the futility. He continued visiting the Willard for his evening whiskey, continued being ambushed by the lobbyists he named and despised. He could have gone elsewhere. Dozens of hotels operated in Washington, but the Willard was where power gathered, and even in retirement, Grant was drawn to power's gravity. The building had achieved such complete dominance that avoiding it meant accepting irrelevance. The lobbyists knew this. They knew that officials would come to them, drawn by the same forces that brought Grant back, despite his disgust. The hotel's lobby was not a place they chose. It was a trap they set. And the bait was the building's proximity to everything that mattered. Grant could name them with contempt. He could not make them leave, and they knew he could not make himself leave either. The lobby held both predator and prey captive, and the architecture ensured continuous collision between them. Chapter 5. The Menu of Corruption. Bribes were not hidden in dark corners, but served alongside oysters. Rockefeller, itemized as casually as the wine list. The Willard's dining room in 1875 functioned as an informal exchange where legislative votes traded at market rates. The pricing was surprisingly transparent. A single senator's vote on a minor tariff adjustment cost $500, usually delivered as investment in a phantom mining company. A committee chairman's support for a railroad land grant ran to $5,000, packaged as consulting fees. Swing votes on major legislation approached $20,000, structured as real estate transactions or silent partnerships. These numbers appeared in letters, diaries, and congressional testimony with remarkable frequency. The corruption was not secret. It was semi-public, conducted openly enough that participants documented it without shame. A railroad executive in 1876 wrote to his board, "Secured Senator Morton's support for $12,000, Senator Conkling for $15,000. Results guaranteed." The letter was filed with corporate records, treated as routine business expense. The mechanics of payment required some creativity. Direct cash transfers were vulgar and legally problematic. Instead, the Willard ecosystem developed sophisticated methods of value transfer. Stock certificates and shell companies appeared in senators' names. Law firms hired legislators as of counsel for annual retainers that required no actual legal work. Lobbyists purchased artwork or horses from senators at prices 10 times market value. The most elegant method involved real estate. A lobbyist would purchase property near Washington at honest market price. The property would be sold to a senator for the same price. 6 months later, the lobbyist would repurchase the property at triple the original price, explaining the appreciation as legitimate market movement. The senator pocketed the profit. The transaction appeared lawful on all documents. Collis Huntington, lobbyist for the Central Pacific Railroad, kept meticulous expense records. In 1877 alone, his lobbying budget exceeded $200,000. He documented payments to 23 senators, 14 representatives, and 7 newspaper editors. The largest single expense was $48,000 to the chairman of the House Pacific Railroad Committee, paid through purchases of worthless mining stock. Huntington's correspondence reveals the casual brutality of the system. Writing to an associate, he explained, "I believe with $200,000 I can pass our bill, but I take it that the same amount will probably defeat it. It is a question of whether we get there first." Legislation was simply the prize in an auction. The highest bidder won. The Credit Mobilier scandal of 1872 exposed the scale of corruption centered at the Willard. The scheme involved Union Pacific Railroad executives creating a fake construction company that charged the railroad massively inflated prices for work. The profits were divided among railroad executives and the congressmen who protected them from investigation. Representative Oakes Ames distributed Credit Mobilier stock to 30 senators and representatives at prices far below market value. The stock paid massive dividends from the fraudulent construction contracts. When investigators finally examined the books, they found that the scheme had extracted $23 million from federal railroad subsidies, equivalent to roughly $500 million in modern currency. Crucially, Ames conducted his stock distributions in the Willard's second-floor parlors. He maintained a permanent suite specifically for these meetings. Senators would arrive for breakfast in the dining room, conduct official government business in the morning, and return to Ames's suite in the afternoon to discuss their investment portfolios. The building made the separation between public service and private profit geographically impossible. The whiskey ring scandal, which nearly destroyed Grant's presidency, also originated at the Willard. Revenue agents and distillery owners met in the hotel's bar to arrange systematic tax fraud. The scheme siphoned $3 million annually from federal revenue, paid out in kickbacks divided between distillers and the government officials who ignored their fraud. The ring operated for 6 years before exposure, and every participant knew the others by sight from their regular meetings in the Willard lobby. Military procurement contracts offered particularly lucrative opportunities. During the continued Indian Wars of the 1870s, the War Department spent millions annually on supplies: rifles, uniforms, food, horses, transport wagons. Every contract went to the lowest bidder, in theory. In practice, the bids were predetermined in Willard parlors, where contractors agreed on prices and divided markets before submitting proposals. One beef contractor in 1876 supplied the army with 3 million pounds of meat at 18 cents per pound. Investigation later revealed the meat was mostly horseflesh and spoiled beef, worth perhaps 4 cents per pound. The contract generated $420,000 in profit, of which $100,000 was distributed to procurement officers and the senators who oversaw War Department appropriations. The mathematics of corruption at the Willard created a perverse economy. Lobbyists spent millions buying legislation, but they spent those millions because the legislation was worth tens of millions. Railroad land grants transferred hundreds of millions of dollars in public property to private companies. Tariff protections generated billions in excess profits over decades. The corruption was not a bug in the system. It was the system functioning exactly as designed, converting public resources into private wealth, with government officials taking commission. Hotel staff participated profitably in this economy. Head waiters knew which tables hosted important negotiations and ensured those tables got the best service. Doormen recognized high-value lobbyists and ensured their messages reached targets immediately. The hotel's messengers ran errands that often involved document transfers between lobbyists and legislators. Everyone received tips, and the tips reflected the value of the transactions they facilitated. The Willard itself charged premium rates for rooms used in lobbying campaigns. A standard guest room cost $5 per night. A room rented by a lobbyist for a multi-week legislative session cost $12 per night. The hotel management understood they were not selling lodging. They were selling access to the building's ecosystem of corruption, and that access commanded market premium. The menu of corruption had an itemized price list, and the Willard collected its percentage from every transaction. Chapter 6. When Scandal Became System. By 1875, the corruption was so open that journalists reported it like the weather, inevitable and unremarkable. Mark Twain arrived in Washington in 1873, researching his novel, The Gilded Age. He spent weeks at the Willard, notebook in hand, documenting the transactions occurring around him. What shocked him was not the corruption's existence, but its casualness. Senators discussed bribes over breakfast. Lobbyists compared purchased votes like merchants comparing inventory. The crime was completely visible. Twain captured one scene in his notes. Railroad lobbyist explaining to dinner companion the precise cost of securing committee votes. $8,000 for the chairman, $5,000 each for 3 members, $3,000 for 2 others. Total $29,000. Bill will save company $2 million annually. Return on investment 7,000%. The novelist used this material throughout his book, barely needing to exaggerate. Fiction could not improve on the reality. Washington's corruption was so theatrical that satire became documentary. Twain's character, Senator Dilworthy, accepts bribes while preaching moral reform, votes for railroad subsidies while denouncing government spending, and lives permanently at the Willard while claiming to represent Kansas farmers. The character was not exaggeration. He was composite portrait. Newspaper correspondents stationed in Washington filed similar reports. The New York Tribune ran a series in 1874 detailing specific corrupt transactions. The reporters named names, cited dollar amounts, and described the Willard meetings where deals were negotiated. The articles created brief scandal, but zero consequences. The named senators won re-election. The implicated lobbyists continued their work. The Willard remained fully booked. This immunity to exposure revealed something crucial about the system. Scandal requires shock. Shock requires deviation from norm. But at the Willard, corruption was the norm. Newspaper exposés read like business reporting because they were business reporting. Lobbyists bought votes. Senators sold votes. Railroads got subsidies. The cycle repeated with mechanical regularity. Congressional investigations occasionally occurred, usually after particularly egregious scandals reached public consciousness. The Credit Mobilier investigation in 1873 was typical. Committees called witnesses. Documents were subpoenaed. Testimony filled hundreds of pages. The investigation confirmed that massive bribery had occurred, that dozens of legislators had accepted payments, that millions in federal funds had been stolen. 2 representatives were censured. 0 went to prison. Most were re-elected. The railroad executives paid no penalties. The system absorbed the scandal like a sponge absorbing water, swelling briefly before returning to original shape. The Willard staff developed expertise in scandal management. When investigations loomed, certain documents would disappear from hotel records. Guest registers would show convenient gaps, and waiters would suddenly become forgetful about which senators dined with which lobbyists. The hotel protected its clients, not from legal principle, but from economic self-interest. If senators feared exposure at the Willard, they would go elsewhere. But they had nowhere else to go. The Willard's monopoly on political access was complete. A senator boycotting the hotel would miss crucial negotiations, lose access to lobbyist funding, and become irrelevant to the informal power structure that governed beneath official government. The building's value was systemic. Individual scandals could not undermine it. This reality became explicit during the whiskey ring trials in 1875. General John MacDonald, the ring's leader, testified that he met with corrupt revenue agents at the Willard at least twice monthly for 5 years. Hundreds of hotel guests must have witnessed these meetings. Not one reported them. Not one testified without subpoena. The Willard operated under an omerta enforced not by threats, but by mutual corruption. Everyone implicated everyone else. Testimony meant self-incrimination. Grant, whose own private secretary was convicted in the whiskey ring, recognized the structural problem. In private correspondence he wrote, "The corruption is so widespread, involves so many, and has continued so long that exposure only reveals how common the practice has become. We cannot prosecute everyone, and prosecuting some seems merely arbitrary." The president understood that his administration was not facing a conspiracy of criminals, but a normalized system of graft. The Willard was not hiding corruption, it was industrializing it, providing the infrastructure that made large-scale bribery efficient and routine. Scandals exposed individual transactions, but could not address the building itself, the space that made those transactions inevitable. Reformers began calling for lobbying regulations as early as 1876. Representative Benjamin Butler proposed requiring lobbyists to register and disclose their clients. The bill died in committee, killed by senators who relied on lobbyist funding. A second attempt in 1878 failed similarly. Reform required political will from the very legislators who profited from the existing system. The irony was noted by multiple observers. Harper's Weekly ran a cartoon showing congressmen debating lobbying reform while lobbyists sat directly behind them, literally whispering in their ears. The caption read, "Consulting the experts." The regulatory capture was so complete that reform itself could not escape it. The Willard's role became not just enabling corruption, but legitimizing it through exposure. If everyone knew senators took bribes and senators still won re-election, voters were implicitly endorsing the practice. If newspapers reported corruption and readers kept electing corrupt officials, the public was complicit. The building's transparency was its greatest protection. The crime was too visible to be criminal. By 1880, scandal had become system. The Willard was no longer controversial. It was simply where business happened. Moralists could condemn it. Satirists could mock it. Journalists could expose it. None of it mattered. The building had achieved something remarkable. It had normalized the sale of democracy to the point where the sale no longer registered as transgression. The lobby was not the scene of the crime. It was the crime scene turned permanent installation, preserved in plain sight. Chapter 7. The Reformers Who Failed. They came with legislation, with speeches, with moral certainty, and the Willard swallowed them whole without changing its menus. The progressive era arrived in Washington with confidence that expertise and good government could dismantle corrupt systems. Between 1900 and 1920, reformers targeted lobbying with a dozen major legislative initiatives. Everyone negotiated its terms with the lobbyists it aimed to regulate, and every negotiation happened within 2 blocks of the Willard. The first serious attempt came in 1907 with the Tillman Act, which banned corporate contributions to federal campaigns. Senator Benjamin Tillman, for all his many moral failures, understood that corporate money in politics began with corporate lobbyists buying access. His bill aimed to cut the funding stream. The bill passed, and corporations immediately circumvented it. Instead of direct contributions, corporate executives made individual donations that were then reimbursed as business expenses. Instead of campaign funding, corporations paid for advocacy campaigns run by newly formed lobbying firms. The Tillman Act stopped nothing. It simply added one layer of accounting between money and influence. The 1910 Publicity Act required congressional candidates to disclose campaign finances. Reformers believed transparency would shame corrupt officials. Instead, it revealed that nearly every elected official depended on money from interests that lobbied them. The disclosure made the corruption official record, which somehow made it less scandalous. If everyone did it, was it really wrong? The Federal Corrupt Practices Act of 1925 attempted comprehensive campaign finance reform. It set spending limits, required disclosure, and banned corporate contributions. The Supreme Court gutted key provisions. Enforcement was assigned to a commission with no budget. Within 3 years, lobbyists had mapped every loophole. The law became paperwork requirement rather than behavioral constraint. What the reformers missed was structural. They tried to regulate individual transactions without addressing the architecture that generated those transactions. The Willard still sat 2 blocks from the White House. Legislators still needed campaign money. Lobbyists still controlled access to that money. The building provided the space where need met supply, and no law could regulate that collision without fundamentally altering how American governance happened. Some reformers recognized this. Senator Robert La Follette proposed radical restructuring in 1913. Public campaign financing, direct election of senators, mandatory cooling-off periods between government service and lobbying work. His proposals died in committee, killed by senators who had already promised votes to lobbyists in exchange for campaign support. The circular logic was perfect. Reform required political support. Political support required campaign funding. Campaign funding came from interests that opposed reform. Therefore, reform was impossible unless reformed politicians could somehow get elected without the money that made election possible. No one solved this paradox. The Willard adapted to each new regulation with practiced ease. When campaign finance laws required disclosure, lobbyists shifted to issue advocacy that fell outside regulation. When direct corporate contributions were banned, trade associations and lobbying firms became conduits. When foreign lobbying faced restriction, domestic subsidiaries handled the work. The hotel itself remained neutral, a Switzerland that hosted all sides. Reformers held strategy meetings in the same parlors where lobbyists planned counter-strategies. Progressive senators ate breakfast 3 tables away from the railroad executives, whose power they claimed to oppose. The building made everyone complicit through proximity. World War I briefly disrupted the pattern. The federal government expanded massively to manage war production, and lobbying followed the growth. Defense contractors needed munitions contracts. Food companies competed for army supply deals. Transportation firms sought shipping arrangements. The Willard's second-floor parlors hosted negotiations that moved millions in war material. After the war, reform momentum built again. The corruption during wartime contracting had been particularly flagrant. Multiple congressional investigations documented profiteering that cost the Treasury hundreds of millions. Reformers demanded permanent lobbying regulation. The Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act of 1946 seemed to answer that demand. It required lobbyists to register, disclose their clients, and report expenditures. The law appeared comprehensive. It was effectively voluntary. No enforcement mechanism existed. Violations carried minimal penalties. Compliance was spotty and unpunished. More fundamentally, the act regulated only direct lobbying of legislators. It did not cover grassroots organizing, issue advertising, or lobbying of executive agencies. The bulk of influence work happened outside the law's scope. Lobbyists registered, filed paperwork, and continued operating exactly as before. The pattern across 50 years of reform was consistent. Legislation passed with public fanfare. Lobbyists found workarounds within months. Enforcement agencies lacked resources. And the fundamental transaction continued. The Willard hosted celebratory dinners for new regulations and strategy sessions to undermine them, often in the same week. Some reformers gave up. Others were absorbed into the system they tried to change. More than a dozen progressive-era legislators became lobbyists after leaving office, cashing in on their reform credentials to command higher consulting fees. They knew the regulations they wrote. They knew the loopholes they left. That knowledge was marketable. The Willard's survival through repeated reform attempts proved a bitter truth. You cannot regulate a system from within when the system controls the regulators. Every lobbying reform was lobbied. Every transparency law was negotiated in private. Every attempt to limit money in politics was funded by money in politics. The building stood as physical evidence that American democracy had a design flaw, and the flaw was not corruption. It was the belief that corruption could be fixed without acknowledging that the system was working exactly as built. Chapter 8. When the building fell silent. In 1968, the Willard closed its doors, and for a decade, Washington pretended the lobbying had ended with it. The decision to close came from mathematics, not morality. The Willard had operated at a loss for 3 years. Maintenance costs exceeded revenue. The building's infrastructure was crumbling. Plumbing leaked. Electrical systems failed. The grand lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers required constant, expensive repair. The owners looked at balance sheets and saw futility. On July 15, 1968, the last guests checked out. Staff packed belongings and locked doors. The lobby that had hosted a century of corruption fell silent. Dust accumulated on the leather sofas. The famous fireplace went cold. Pennsylvania Avenue had one less landmark, and Washington had one less symbol of its dysfunction. The closure seemed to represent something larger. The 1960s were demolishing old orders. Political scandals, Vietnam protests, civil rights upheaval, and assassinations were tearing apart consensus reality. Maybe the Willard's closure signaled the end of Gilded Age corruption. Maybe modern democracy would be cleaner. This was fantasy. Lobbying had not ended. It had evolved. By 1968, the lobbying industry no longer needed the Willard's theatrical setting. Professional firms had replaced individual operators. A K Street had become the new power corridor. Lobbyists worked from office buildings with computers, research staff, and direct phone lines to congressional offices. The collision between money and power had been streamlined, made efficient, stripped of the Willard's Victorian grandeur. The numbers revealed the transformation. In 1950, Washington had approximately 5,000 registered lobbyists. By 1970, that number exceeded 15,000. Total lobbying expenditure in 1950 was estimated at $50 million annually. By 1970, it approached $2 billion. The industry had not shrunk. It had industrialized. The diffusion made it harder to see. When lobbying concentrated at the Willard, journalists could stake out one lobby and observe the ecosystem. When lobbying dispersed across hundreds of K Street offices, observation became impossible. Reporters could not be everywhere. The transparency that once made the Willard scandalous disappeared into bureaucratic opacity. Professional associations formalized the industry. The American League of Lobbyists was founded in 1979, offering certification programs and ethical guidelines. Lobbyists were no longer shady operators. They were professionals with credentials, associations, and respectability. The profession Grant named with contempt had achieved legitimacy through institutional capture. The regulatory environment had also changed, though not in ways reformers intended. The Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 and its 1974 amendments created new disclosure requirements and campaign contribution limits. Lobbyists adapted by creating political action committees, which could bundle individual contributions and deliver them collectively. The PAC system allowed organized money to flow legally, tracked officially, and influence democracy with full regulatory blessing. The Willard's closure thus coincided with lobbying's maturation. The building was no longer needed because the function had been distributed throughout Washington's infrastructure. Every office building on K Street was a mini Willard. Every congressional hearing room was a negotiation space. Every campaign fundraiser was an influence transaction. The corruption the Willard concentrated had been atomized, but not eliminated. Some reformers celebrated the Willard's closure as symbolic victory. Senator William Proxmire called it the end of an era of smoke-filled rooms and backroom deals. He was wrong. The rooms were no longer smoke-filled because people quit smoking. The deals happened in conference rooms instead of hotel parlors. But democracy was still for sale. The venue had changed. The transaction had not. During the Willard's vacant decade, Washington also faced its defining modern scandal. Watergate exploded in 1972, revealing that presidential corruption exceeded anything the Gilded Age imagined. The scandal was not about lobbying, but about abuse of power. Yet it shared the Willard's fundamental story. Proximity to power corrupts. AFWA and American institutions provided insufficient barriers. The lobbying industry thrived through Watergate. While the presidency fell, K Street lobbying firms signed new clients and reported record revenue. The scandal proved that individual corruption could be punished, while systemic corruption continued. Nixon resigned. The lobbyists kept working. The Willard itself became real estate speculation. Developers proposed office buildings, shopping malls, and apartment complexes. Preservationists fought to save the historic structure. For 12 years, the building sat empty at the intersection of Pennsylvania Avenue and 14th Street, a ghost haunting the scene of its crimes. Inside, decay accelerated. Water damage warped floors. Ceiling plaster collapsed. Copper pipes were stolen for scrap. The grand staircase where senators once processed to their suites became dangerous with rot. The lobby where Grant was ambushed by lobbyists filled with debris. The building was dying, and Washington did not seem to miss it. But underneath the decay, the structure remained sound. The steel frame was intact. The foundation was solid. The location was still 2 blocks from the White House. The building was not dead. It was waiting. Chapter 9. The Resurrection of Influence. When the Willard reopened in 1986, the lobbyists returned like migratory birds, proof that the building had never been the problem. The restoration began in 1986, led by a development partnership that saw value beneath the decay. They invested $110 million in reconstruction, an extraordinary sum that reflected the property's location as much as its history. The project took 5 years. Craftsmen restored the lobby's marble floors. Electricians rewired the entire building. Plumbers replaced every pipe. The Willard was not repaired. It was rebuilt to pristine condition while maintaining its 19th century appearance. The restored hotel opened in August 1986 with all the grandeur of its Victorian peak. The lobby gleamed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled. The famous fireplace was relit. The second-floor parlors were available for private meetings. The main dining room served meals beneath restored ceiling murals. The building looked exactly as it had when Grant was ambushed there, but with air conditioning and modern plumbing. Within weeks, the lobbyists returned. They did not call themselves lobbyists anymore. They were government relations consultants, public policy advisors, and strategic communication specialists. But they did exactly what their predecessors had done. They rented rooms, they sat in the lobby, they cultivated relationships with legislators, and they converted proximity into influence. The industry they represented had exploded during the Willard's dormant years. Federal government spending in 1985 exceeded $1 trillion annually. Every $1 billion created lobbying opportunities. Defense contractors fought for procurement deals. Healthcare companies sought regulatory favor. Technology firms wanted antitrust protection. Energy companies needed environmental exemptions. The scale of federal activity dwarfed anything the Gilded Age imagined. Lobbying revenue reflected this expansion. In 1985, the industry generated approximately $5 billion annually. By 1990, it exceeded $8 billion. The number of registered lobbyists topped 30,000. These were registered lobbyists. Thousands more worked as consultants, lawyers, and advisors whose activities fell outside registration requirements. The Willard immediately became a preferred venue for this expanded influence industry. Lobbyists booked the second-floor parlors for client meetings. Trade associations held receptions in the main dining room. Political action committees scheduled fundraisers in the ballroom. The building's resurrection was also the resurrection of its original function. Modern lobbying was more sophisticated than its Gilded Age ancestor. Today's lobbyists employed economists to write policy papers, lawyers to draft legislation, and publicists to shape media coverage. They funded think tanks that produced research supporting their positions. They financed grassroots campaigns that created the appearance of public support. The crude bribes of the 1870s had been replaced by complex influence campaigns that touched every point where policy was made. But the fundamental transaction remained unchanged. Money still bought access. Access still bought influence. Influence still determined legislation. The Willard provided the space where these transactions initiated. A lobbyist hosting a breakfast meeting at the Willard was not bribing a senator. He was beginning a relationship that would eventually produce policy favorable to his clients. The crime was legal because it had been distributed across so many steps that no single step appeared criminal. The hotel management understood its role. The Willard marketed itself explicitly as a venue for government relations. Promotional materials emphasized the building's history and proximity to power. The message was clear: conduct business here and inherit the legacy of influence this building represents. Location remained the product, and influence remained what the location sold. The lobbying industry's growth created a permanent Washington establishment of former government officials cashing in on their experience. By 1990, nearly half of retired senators and 40% of retired representatives registered as lobbyists within 2 years of leaving office. They knew the procedures. They knew the players. They knew which arguments would move votes. That knowledge commanded fees ranging from $50,000 to $500,000 annually per client. This revolving door operated openly at the Willard. Former cabinet members hosted client meetings in the same parlors where they once negotiated policy. Ex-senators dined with current senators, discussing legislation they would lobby the next day. The line between public service and private profit had not blurred. It had dissolved. Government experience was simply the apprenticeship for the real career, monetizing that experience for corporate clients. Campaign finance after the Willard's reopening followed similar patterns. The 1986 and 1990 campaigns saw record spending. The PCs, controlled by lobbying interests, donated hundreds of millions to congressional campaigns. Candidates spent increasing time fundraising, often at events organized by lobbyists. The system had become dependency. Legislators needed lobbyist money to win elections, then voted for policies favoring those lobbyists to maintain funding for the next election. The Willard hosted countless fundraising events. A lobbyist could rent the ballroom, invite 20 wealthy clients, and raise $50,000 for a senator in 2 hours. The senator would attend, thank the donors, and remember who made the event possible when that lobbyist's clients needed favorable legislation. The transaction was documented, reported to the Federal Election Commission, and entirely legal. By the mid-1990s, the Willard had reclaimed its position as shadow capital. CNN stationed cameras in the lobby during major legislative battles, knowing key players would pass through. Print journalists kept rooms booked by the week to maintain access. The building was news because news happened there. The Willard had not just reopened, it had resumed its reign, proof that a century of reform had changed almost nothing about how American democracy actually operated. Chapter 10: The $35 billion industry. Today, more money flows through Washington lobbying than the entire GDP of some nations Grant tried to protect. The modern lobbying industry generates $35 billion in annual revenue. That number represents disclosed spending by registered lobbyists and firms, meaning the actual total is certainly higher. For perspective, 35 billion exceeds the gross domestic product of Iceland, Malta, and Bermuda combined. A century and a half after Grant coined the term in contempt, lobbying has become among America's most lucrative industries. Approximately 45,000 people work as registered lobbyists in Washington. The actual number of influence professionals exceeds 100,000 when including consultants, policy advisors, public relations specialists, and research staff who support lobbying campaigns without registering. This means roughly 187 influence professionals work in Washington for every member of Congress. The ratio reveals who actually governs. The top spending sectors illustrate where influence flows. Healthcare interests spent $3 billion lobbying in 2023. The pharmaceutical industry alone employed over 2,000 lobbyists. Financial services spent $2.8 billion. Technology companies, relative newcomers to Washington influence, spent $2.2 billion. Energy and natural resources interests spent $1.8 billion. These figures reflect only direct lobbying. They exclude political contributions, issue advertising, and think tank funding. The largest individual spenders demonstrate the return on investment. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce spent over $200 million annually lobbying for business interests. The National Association of Realtors spent $130 million. The Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America spent $90 million. And these organizations employ entire buildings full of staff whose only job is influencing government policy to favor their clients. Individual companies treat lobbying as essential infrastructure. Amazon spent $53 million lobbying in 2022. Meta spent $48 million. Alphabet, Google's parent company, spent $42 million. These technology giants, which barely existed 30 years ago, now maintain lobbying operations larger than most Gilded Age corporations' entire budgets. The return on lobbying investment is difficult to quantify precisely, but demonstrably enormous. A 2011 study found that corporations earned $220 in tax benefits for every dollar spent lobbying for tax legislation. Another analysis found that the financial industry's lobbying prevented regulations that would have cost banks approximately tens of billions annually. Lobbying does not spend money. It invests money at returns that would make any hedge fund envious. The Willard's role in this $35 billion ecosystem is proportionally smaller than its Gilded Age dominance, but symbolically unchanged. The hotel hosts hundreds of lobbying events annually. Trade associations hold conferences there. Corporations rent ballrooms for advocacy campaigns. The building remains valuable not because it houses the entire industry, but because it represents the industry's legitimacy and history. Campaign finance numbers tell the parallel story. The 2022 congressional elections cost over $7 billion. The 2020 presidential election exceeded $14 billion. These staggering sums come largely from interests that lobby government. The overlap between major campaign donors and major lobbying spenders approaches 100%. Money in politics is not separate from lobbying. It is the same money circulating through different mechanisms toward the same goal, influencing policy. Political action committees, which did not exist in the Willard's Gilded Age peak, now dominate campaign finance. Super PACs, created by the Citizens United Supreme Court decision in 2010, can raise and spend unlimited amounts. The top 20 super PACs in 2022 raised over $3 billion. Most of this money came from wealthy individuals and corporations who also employ lobbyists. The PAC system allows the same interests that lobby directly to also fund the elections of the officials they lobby. The revolving door has similarly accelerated. A 2023 analysis found that 70% of former senators and 65% of former representatives who left office after 2014 registered as lobbyists or joined firms providing government relations services. Former staff members revolve even faster. A congressional staffer with a decade of experience can quadruple their salary by moving to a lobbying firm, taking their knowledge of legislative procedure and personal relationships with current staff directly to corporate clients. This revolving door operates openly, regulated only by cooling-off periods that range from 1 to 2 years, depending on position. After the cooling-off period expires, former officials can immediately begin lobbying their former colleagues. The system treats government experience as job training for corporate advocacy. Public service becomes resume building for private profit. The Willard participates in this revolving door directly. Former senators maintain offices in the building. Ex-cabinet members keep permanent suites. The hotel provides the respectable setting where government knowledge converts to corporate value. A former transportation secretary meeting airline executives at the Willard is not committing a crime. He is participating in the designed flow of expertise from public sector to private sector, with lobbying firms as the intermediaries capturing value from both sides. Grant, watching from the Willard lobby in 1879, I saw men spending thousands to influence policy worth millions. Today's lobbyists spend billions to influence policy worth trillions. The scale has changed by orders of magnitude. The structure has not changed at all. Chapter 11. The Lobby That Never Closes. Walk into the Willard today and you will see men in expensive suits having quiet conversations that sound like business but smell like power. The Willard lobby in 2024 looks remarkably like the Willard lobby in 1874. The furniture is different. The lighting is electric rather than gas. But the essential choreography is identical. Men and women in business attire sit in clusters, speaking quietly but intently. Phones replace leather portfolios as the containers for valuable information. The conversations still concern influence, access, and the conversion of proximity into advantage. Visit on a Tuesday morning during congressional session, and the lobby is full by 9. Lobbyists position themselves in sight lines to the entrance, waiting to accidentally encounter targets arriving for breakfast meetings. The hotel still offers intimate alcoves where conversations can occur semi-privately in public view. The architectural genius of the original design remains functional. The main dining room operates similarly. Power tables still exist, occupied by the same types who held them a century ago. Today's railroad magnates are technology executives. Yesterday's tariff lobbyists are today's tax policy consultants. The players have changed. The play continues. The second floor parlors remain available for private meetings, now marketed explicitly for government relations events. The hotel provides catering, audio-visual equipment, and discreet staff who understand that what happens in parlor meetings stays in parlor meetings. The rooms that once hosted credit mobilier negotiations now host healthcare lobbying strategy sessions. The purpose is preserved across centuries. The hotel was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1974, while still closed and decaying. The designation recognizes the Willard's role in American history, preserving it as heritage worth protecting. The irony is acute. The building's historical significance derives from its function as corruption infrastructure. The landmark status memorializes and protects the site where democracy was systematically compromised. We have preserved the crime scene as a museum, then reopened it for business. Current hotel management acknowledges the history carefully. Marketing materials mention Lincoln's stay and Grant's coining of the term lobbyist. They do not mention the credit mobilier scandal or the whiskey ring. The building's complicity in systemic corruption is softened into colorful historical anecdote. The Willard was not the site of democracy's sale. It was merely witness to the spirited debate and colorful characters of American political history. This sanitization allows the building to function without moral weight. A lobbyist hosting a meeting at the Willard can claim historical resonance without acknowledging historical pattern. The building provides legitimacy through longevity. If the Willard has hosted political negotiations for 170 years, and then negotiating there must be acceptable practice. The building's survival becomes argument for the practice's legitimacy. Contemporary journalists still cover the Willard, but the coverage has changed. Where Gilded Age reporters documented specific corrupt transactions, modern journalists write feature pieces about the hotel's storied past. The corruption has been relegated to history, even though the function continues. The building is treated as relic rather than active participant, even as active participation occurs in every parlor. Walk through the lobby on any evening and overhear the same essential conversations Grant overheard. The language is more careful. No one offers explicit bribes. But listen to a lobbyist explaining to a congressional staffer why certain legislation would benefit the lawmaker's district. Watch the staffer take notes. Follow the staffer back to Capitol Hill. That note will become policy language. The Willard provided the space for the first step of that chain. The building staff maintained the same discreet professionalism their predecessors practiced. Concierge recognize lobbyists and legislators by sight. Doormen know which guests to greet by name. Waiters understand which tables require extra privacy. The service is impeccable, which means the service includes protecting the building's function from external observation. The Willard has been renovated twice more since its 1986 reopening in 1998 and 2014. Each renovation preserved the historical aesthetics while upgrading infrastructure. The result is a building that appears unchanged since 1870, but operates with modern efficiency. The illusion of continuity serves the continuity of function. Room rates reflect the building's position. A standard room costs $600 to $1,000 per night. Suites run $2,000 to $5,000. Corporate clients pay these rates because they are not purchasing lodging. They are purchasing access to the building's ecosystem. The proximity to power that Henry Willard recognized in 1850 still commands premium pricing. The Willard today is simultaneously museum and active crime scene. It is a landmark protecting history and a machine producing present corruption. Visitors walk the same lobby where Grant was ambushed, preserved carefully as heritage site, while modern lobbyists use that same lobby for the same purpose in real time. The building has achieved something remarkable. It has made its own corruption historic and therefore acceptable. We memorialize it because we cannot stop it, and we cannot stop it because we have memorialized it. Or Chapter 12, What We Bought with Our Proximity. The Willard taught America that corruption does not require darkness, only convenience, and we have been practicing that lesson ever since. The building stands at Pennsylvania Avenue and 14th Street, still 2 blocks from the White House, still positioned at the gravitational center of federal power. 174 years after Henry Willard recognized that proximity was worth more than principle, the principle remains operational. This American democracy is shaped by architecture as much as law, and the Willard is the architecture that shaped it. The story is not about individual corruption. Corrupt individuals are universal across time and place. the story is about systemic design. The Willard demonstrates that if you place unregulated wealth within walking distance of concentrated power, corruption becomes not aberration, but inevitability. The building did not cause human greed. It created the conditions where greed could operate efficiently, repeatedly, and at scale. Grant's contempt when he coined the term lobbyist was personal and moral. He despised the men who ambushed him in the lobby, but his contempt missed the structural truth. The lobbyists were not invaders corrupting an otherwise pure system. They were participants in a system designed to invite exactly their participation. The Willard did not corrupt American democracy. It revealed that American democracy had designed itself to be corrupted. The architectural lesson is broader than the Willard. Every state capital has its equivalent, buildings positioned near power where wealth and influence collide. Washington simply concentrated the pattern at national scale. The Willard became the model for influence infrastructure. Create the space, ensure proximity, provide discrete privacy within public presence, and watch the transactions multiply. Century and a half of reform has not altered this fundamental pattern. We have regulated disclosure, limited contributions, required registration, and established cooling-off periods. None of it matters because none of it addresses architecture. Money still needs access to power. Power still needs money to maintain office. No amount of paperwork changes that collision when the collision happens in spaces designed to facilitate it. The $35 billion lobbying industry is not growth of something alien to American governance. It is maturation of something built into American governance from the beginning. The founders designed a system where citizens could petition government. They did not anticipate that petition would industrialize, that proximity would commodify, or that access would become the most valuable product Washington sells. But the design permitted it, and the Willard proved it. The building's survival through closures, renovations, and designation as historic landmark reveals what we actually value. We preserve it because we want what it represents to continue. If we genuinely oppose the Willard's function, we would have demolished the building or converted it to another use. Instead, we restored it, celebrated it, and reopened it for business. The preservation is admission that we have accepted the corruption as simply how democracy operates. Some argue that modern lobbying is protected speech, that citizens and corporations have constitutional right to petition government, and that lobbying is simply the organized exercise of that right. This argument has legal merit. It also perfectly describes why the problem is insoluble within existing frameworks. If corruption is protected by the First Amendment, then corruption is fundamental to American democracy, and not deviation from it. The Willard forces confrontation with this reality. The building cannot be dismissed as historical aberration. It operated continuously for over a century, closed for barely a decade, and immediately resumed its function upon reopening. The pattern is not anomaly. It is the pattern. Walking through the Willard today, watching suited professionals have quiet conversations in the lobby, recognizing that those conversations will influence legislation worth billions, the question becomes not how to stop this, but whether we want to stop this. We have had 150 years to stop it. We have chosen not to. Every reform has been half measure. Every regulation has been negotiated. Every attempt at fundamental change has been compromised by the system it tried to change. The Willard is not the problem. The Willard is the evidence. The problem is that we built a democracy where power concentrates in specific geographic locations, where wealth can purchase proximity to that power, and where the collision between the two generates inevitable transaction. The building simply makes that transaction efficient. Grant's disgust in 1879 was righteous but futile. He named the problem but could not solve it because the problem was not the lobbyists. It was the lobby, and the lobby was not a moral failure. It was an architectural feature. We built spaces where democracy and money would collide. We keep building them. We preserve them as landmarks. We conduct democracy's business inside them. And then we express surprise that democracy is for sale. The Willard taught America that corruption does not require darkness. It flourishes in well-lit lobbies, in preserved historic buildings, in spaces designated as cultural heritage. It operates openly because openness provides protection. If everyone sees the corruption and the corruption continues, the corruption has achieved something more powerful than concealment. It has achieved acceptance. We are the architects of our own corruption. We designed it. We built it. We maintain it. And we preserve it as history while it continues operating as present. The Willard stands as monument to that choice. A building that proves proximity is indeed worth more than principle, because we have consistently chosen proximity and abandoned principle every time the two competed. The lobby never closes because we never wanted it closed. We only wanted to pretend we did.